I thought losing my wife after 41 years of marriage was the greatest heartbreak I would ever face. I was wrong. The real nightmare began on a quiet Monday morning when I opened the door to our boathouse and found it empty. The boat my wife had spent 25 years restoring with her own hands had vanished without a trace. At first, I believed someone had stolen it. A few hours later, I discovered something far more devastating. My own son had sold it, not because he needed money to survive, not because I had given him permission. He sold the last piece of his mother's legacy, so he and his wife could fly first class to Europe. What I did not know then was that stealing the boat was only the beginning of a betrayal that would destroy my family and expose a fraud worth millions. My name is Mason Carter. I am 68 years old, and I spent 4 decades building Carter Boat Works into one of the most respected marina businesses on Lake Michigan. I started with one rented dock, a folding table, and a handful of tools. Over the years, that tiny operation grew into 4 successful marinas and a boat restoration shop known across the state. My wife, Grace, was the reason any of it mattered. While I built the company, she built our home and poured 25 years of love into restoring a beautiful 1958 wooden speedboat she named Hope. That boat became her masterpiece, and after she died suddenly from a brain aneurysm, it became the only place where I still felt close to her. Every morning before heading to work, I sat inside that boat with a cup of coffee. The smell of polished mahogany and fresh varnish reminded me of Grace, and sitting there made the silence in our house easier to bear. Then one morning, I opened the boathouse door and froze. The lift was empty. The boat was gone. Nothing had been forced open. The locks were untouched, and the security cameras had been disabled by someone who knew exactly where the wiring was hidden. Only 3 people had access to that building. Me, our longtime caretaker, who was away on vacation, and my only son, Ethan. I called him immediately. He answered from the airport while boarding a flight to Europe with his wife. Without even trying to hide it, he admitted he had sold the boat. He sounded annoyed that I was upset. He told me the boat had been sitting unused for months and said it would belong to him one day anyway, so he simply moved the timeline forward. Then he proudly explained that he sold it to pay for their dream vacation. I could barely breathe. That boat was never his to sell. It still belonged to me, and more importantly, it represented 25 years of his mother's life. When I reminded him of that, he brushed it aside and told me to stop overreacting because it was only a boat. Then he hung up. As angry as I was, something about his story did not make sense. Grace had the boat professionally appraised a few years earlier. It was worth nearly $300,000. Nobody sells an heirloom worth that much just to pay for a vacation. There had to be another reason. Before I could figure it out, the boat broker called me. He explained that my son had only received a small deposit because the title still belonged to me. Ethan had presented what appeared to be a notarized power of attorney giving him permission to sell the boat, but the broker refused to release the remaining money until ownership could be verified. Then he told me something that changed everything. While inspecting the boat, he discovered a hidden metal box tucked beneath the dashboard. Inside was a notebook written entirely in my wife's handwriting. The first page stopped my heart. If anyone besides me finds this, something has already gone terribly wrong, and Mason needs to know the truth. I drove straight to the broker's office and spent the next hour reading every page. It was not a diary. It was evidence. For more than 2 years, Grace had quietly documented suspicious activity inside my company. She listed fake invoices, unexplained payments, missing money, and offshore wire transfers. She suspected someone close to me was stealing from the business. Her final entry was written only days before she died. She had uncovered everything. She wrote that millions of dollars had been secretly transferred into offshore accounts, and that there was a second executive approving every transaction. She planned to tell me that Sunday morning. She never got the chance. My attorney immediately hired a forensic accountant. Within days, every one of Grace's notes was confirmed. More than $2 million had disappeared. through a fake supplier that existed only on paper. The transfers were approved by my operations manager, but every payment required a second executive signature. That signature belonged to my son. The deeper investigators looked, the worse it became. The offshore company receiving the money had been registered by my daughter-in-law. She was not simply enjoying the stolen money. She helped build the entire scheme. The European vacation was never the reason they sold the boat. They needed fast cash before anyone uncovered years of fraud. When they returned home, I invited them to dinner. My attorney waited in the next room, while every piece of evidence sat inside a folder on my kitchen table. I asked one simple question: tell me about North Harbor Supply. Both of them froze. My son immediately blamed accounting mistakes. My daughter-in-law stared at the floor without saying a word. Then I placed Grace's notebook on the table. I told them their mother had uncovered everything before she died and documented every stolen dollar. The excuses stopped. I looked at my son and realized I no longer recognized the man standing in front of me. He had forged my signature, stolen from the company I spent my life building, betrayed his own mother, and sold the last thing she ever created without feeling a single ounce of guilt. I told both of them to leave my house and never return. Federal investigators took over shortly afterward. My former operations manager confessed and admitted Ethan had approached him years earlier with the plan to create fake vendors and slowly move money overseas. What started as small thefts eventually became more than $2 million. My daughter-in-law managed the offshore accounts and helped hide the money. The evidence was overwhelming. My son and his wife were convicted of wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and forgery. He received 7 years in federal prison. She received 9. Almost every stolen dollar was recovered. I refused to let that money disappear back into the company as though nothing had happened. Instead, I created the Grace Carter Foundation for Brain Aneurysm Research. The money that once represented greed now helps families avoid the same tragedy that took my wife without warning. I also rebuilt my company from the ground up, replacing dishonest executives with loyal employees who had spent decades working on the docks instead of chasing easy money in offices. The business became stronger than it had ever been. A month after the trial, I bought Hope back from the broker. He had refused to sell it to anyone else because he believed some boats were never truly for sale. Today it rests in the same boathouse where Grace left it. Most evenings I sit inside with a cup of coffee and run my hand across the polished wood she spent 25 years restoring. I think about the woman who quietly uncovered the truth while everyone else, including me, remained blind. People sometimes ask whether I will ever forgive my son. I still do not have an answer. But I know one thing for certain. The deepest betrayals rarely come from strangers. They come from the people you trusted enough to never question. And sometimes justice begins with nothing more than an empty boathouse and a missing boat.